We begin with an Iranian oil tanker that's travelled a fair distance in the past few months and whose current position is causing some alarm in Western capitals. The Adrian Daria 1 was seized with the help of British Marines by the British Overseas Territory of Gibraltar at the beginning of July on suspicion it was bound for Syria with Iranian oil in violation of European sanctions. It was released 6 weeks later, despite US protests, after written assurances that the vessel would not continue to Syria. And yet here it is now, some 2 more nautical miles off the coast of Syria, its position revealed by satellite images. The US National Security Advisor John Bolton has tweeted that anyone who didn't think the oil tanker was heading to Syria is in denial. He's been an advocate of the tough US policy on Iran, which has seen the Trump administration pull out of the 2015 international nuclear agreement and the imposition of increasingly punitive sanctions against Iran. It's a policy at variance with the European signatories of the agreement. Fred Fleitz is a former chief of staff to John Bolton. Was he surprised that the tanker had turned up near Syria?
I'm a little surprised that the Iranians were this blatant in their lying, and I'm very disappointed that this ship was released. This oil is now going to be used to support the Assad regime, and I just think it was a bad policy move by Gibraltar and by the British government.
You're disappointed that the Gibraltar and British governments let it go. Were they fooled by Iran?
I think they were fooled by Iran. I also believe that European governments are sticking to this very strict interpretation of international law on how and when ships like this can be seized. And I understand that they don't agree with the American interpretation that because the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is behind Iran's oil industry, that was justification for seizing the ship. It's too bad that they didn't side with us.
They had assurances, though, both governments from Iran, that it wouldn't end up, this oil tanker, in Syria.
Well, I imagine John Bolton is laughing heartily that Iran promised something like this, and then Iran didn't keep its word. Iran didn't keep its word on the nuclear deal with the international community either, and I think that we're going to see similar violations by this. This is a rogue state. We can't trust this rogue state to keep commitments like this.
What is the current US strategy on Iran?
Well, President Trump rejected the nuclear deal with Iran because he thought it was a bad deal and because he believed that there were aspects of Iran's situation that weren't addressed, such as its missile program and its sponsorship of terror, its meddling in Middle East conflicts. Right now, I think the Trump administration policy has put us in a better position. It is denying Iran funds that it was using to give to its military, to sponsor terrorism. We know Hezbollah in Lebanon has been starved of funds because of the U.S. sanctions. I believe Iran still is pursuing nuclear weapons. Funds are being denied to that. So right now, we're in a position where Iran is being denied these funds and is being denied access to technologies that it could use to develop nuclear weapons and missiles. And hopefully Iran will come around and begin negotiations on a better deal. But in the meantime, the U.S. position is that we have made the situation better than it was.
The sort of areas that you were talking about then, in very broad terms, Iranian expansionism in the region, were never meant to be covered by the international nuclear deal. And many would argue that the United States, by pulling out of that deal, has undermined it, because, of course, it was the US that pulled out of the deal, that breached the agreement rather than Iran.
I think the record's clear that Iran was in violation of this agreement from the very beginning, including by failing to provide an accurate accounting of its prior nuclear weapons activities, which were a prerequisite for receiving billions in sanctions relief in early 2016. But the main argument that you hear over and over again is that President Trump's actions have caused Iran to behave badly. That's wrong. Iran has been behaving badly since the nuclear deal was announced. What really happened is that these people are arguing that if the president ordered us to pull out of the nuclear deal, Iran will behave worse. That's not really an argument for staying in this agreement. It just shows why this agreement was a fraud to begin with.
So you're not satisfied with the kind of scrutiny that the IAEA has imposed on Iran? I mean, it's been in and out of the country and seems to have given it a clean bill of health up until now.
You have to read very closely what the IAEA has been doing. It has only been been investigating declared nuclear sites. It hasn't been declaring investigating nuclear sites. In addition, we know that a warehouse that contained nuclear activity that the Israelis revealed last year, it took the IAEA a year to investigate this site. It finally investigated it in April 2019, found evidence of nuclear activities, which the Iranians now are refusing to explain, and the IAEA is trying to play down their lack of cooperation. So I'm very skeptical when people say the IAEA has thoroughly been investigating the Iranian nuclear program and its compliance with the JCPOA.
You speak about Iran being in violation of the JCPOA since its inception, and yet the Trump administration twice signed off on its compliance.
The president reluctantly agreed with his advisors to continue to stay in the nuclear deal while we negotiated ways to get Iran to comply or to improve the agreement. The president was never happy about these extensions. And when he finally got rid of his national security advisor, H.R. McMaster, and hired John Bolton, he promptly withdrew from the agreement.
Can I just return to U.S. policy towards Iran? A lot of people are slightly confused about what it is. And let me just quote you from the Washington Post last weekend, which reported President Trump has expressed a willingness to meet with Iran's president, ruled out any plans for regime change in the country, and said discussions were underway to see if other nations could extend a letter of credit to bolster Iran's ailing economy. This from a president who is imposing a policy of maximum pressure on Iran with punitive sanctions.
The president is prepared to negotiate with Iran when he's prepared to come to the table. He's not prepared to let up on the sanctions against Iran. He's going to keep the maximum pressure sanctions in place. But he's always been willing to talk, just like he's been willing to talk to Kim Jong-un. The Iranians have to take advantage of that situation. And their position is that the sanctions have to be lifted first. That's a demand that President Trump will not give into.
But discussions underway to see if other nations could extend a letter of credit to bolster Iran's ailing economy, seeming to agree there that European states should be able to lend Iran money.
My understanding that the president has made it clear that if Iran starts cooperating with the international community and agrees to start negotiating a bona fide agreement on its nuclear program and its other threats to global security, that a lot of things are possible. But right now, that's not in the cards.
So you would say that there are no differences within the Trump administration on how to proceed with Iran?
Oh, I think there's always differences among the president's senior advisors. And it's his job to listen to the advice of all his advisors and make a decision. He's ultimately the final decision maker on national security issues. And I'm sure there are lots of differences between his senior officials.
That was Fleitz, former chief of staff to John Bolton.